The sky had that heavy, gray stillness that comes before the rain, the kind that makes you feel the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens. Next, on the side of a quiet suburban street in Ohio, a young father stood beside a beat-up blue sedan, his little daughter's hand tightly gripping his. The car was packed with all they owned, a few clothes, a worn-out teddy bear, and a blanket that had seen better days, the woman standing next to him with tired eyes. And a voice that trembled when she spoke wasn't his wife. But she looked at the little girl as though she were her own, and as the man watched the sun dip behind the clouds, he whispered under his breath, "We'll sleep outside tonight." But the moment the words left his lips, something inside him snapped. His voice grew firm, his jaw clenched, and he muttered louder, "Not on my watch. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts." Ethan Miller was a 34-year-old single father who had learned the hard way that life could take everything from you, except your will to fight back. 2 years ago, he lost his wife, Sarah, in a car accident that shattered his world. They had been college sweethearts, the kind of couple who finished each other's sentences and made plans for a forever that never came overnight. Ethan went from being a husband to being both mom and dad to their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. For months after the funeral, he lived on autopilot, working double shifts at a construction site, barely eating, barely sleeping. His only purpose was Lily. She had her mother's bright blue eyes, her laugh, and the same way of looking at the world, like everything was still beautiful. It was Lily's tiny arms wrapping around his neck every night that kept him from falling apart completely. But just when he thought he was starting to find his footing again, life threw another punch. The construction company he worked for shut down unexpectedly. With no savings and mounting bills, Ethan fell behind on rent. He begged his landlord for an extension, explaining his situation. A single dad trying his best, but sympathy rarely pays the bills. Within 2 weeks, he and Lily were standing outside their small apartment with their belongings stuffed in trash bags. That's when Melissa appeared, the woman standing beside him that rainy evening. She was his late wife's younger sister, living 2 towns away, a nurse who spent her days caring for strangers. She had offered to take them in temporarily, but Ethan refused. At first, he didn't want charity. He didn't want to be a burden. But that night, when Lily's small voice asked, "Daddy, where will we sleep?" something in him broke. He drove to Melissa's place with a mix of shame and hope burning in his chest. Melissa welcomed them with open arms. For weeks, she tried to make them feel at home. She cooked warm meals, bought Lily a new pair of shoes, and even helped Ethan apply for new jobs. But there was tension. Ethan felt like a guest in a house that wasn't his. Every time he saw Melissa come home late from a night shift, exhausted yet smiling, guilt gnawed at him. He wanted to provide for his daughter, not rely on anyone else. Then came the day that pushed him to the edge. Ethan finally got a job interview, a warehouse position that promised steady hours and decent pay. It was his chance to get back on his feet. But the interview was 2 towns away, and his old car had been making a strange noise for days. He prayed it would hold out just long enough. Halfway there, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died by the side of the road. Rain began to fall in thin, cold sheets. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard as if sheer willpower could make it start again. Lily sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her teddy bear. She didn't complain, didn't cry, she just waited. Hours passed. The tow truck took forever. By the time they reached the repair shop, the interview was long over. The mechanic told him the truth. The car's transmission was gone. Repairing it would cost more than the car was worth. Ethan felt the world crumble around him again. That night, when they finally got back to Melissa's apartment, her landlord was waiting outside. He looked angry. "Your sister told me she'd cover rent for you this month, but she's late again. I can't keep extending deadlines." The words hit Ethan like a punch. He realized Melissa had been secretly paying her rent late to help him. That guilt he'd been carrying suddenly grew heavier. He thanked the landlord, promised to sort things out, and walked inside. Melissa was asleep on the couch, her scrubs still on, her face pale with exhaustion. Lily had already gone to bed. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty job application forms in front of him. Then he wrote a note. "Thank you for everything, I'll make it right." He folded it and left it on the counter. The next morning, before sunrise, he woke Lily and quietly packed their few belongings back into the car. Melissa's street was silent. The air was crisp, the sky a dull gray. He didn't know where they were going, just that he couldn't stay. Hours later, they parked behind an old shopping plaza. Ethan tried to stay strong, but the truth Hit him hard, they had nowhere to go. He looked at Lily, who was sitting on the hood of the car, swinging her little legs. Her hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and she smiled at him with all the innocence in the world. "It's okay, Daddy," she said softly. "Mommy's watching us." That's when the rain started again. Not heavy, but cold enough to make his heart ache. He whispered, "We'll sleep outside tonight," but the moment the words came out, he saw Lily's small hands trembling. As she tried to pull the blanket tighter, he stood up, clenched his fists, and said louder, "No, not on my watch." He ran back to the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove toward the city with no plan. He just knew he had to find somewhere safe. They stopped at a community shelter, but it was full. He went to another. But they were only accepting families with referrals. Exhausted, he sat in the car, his head against the steering wheel. Then he heard a knock. On the window, it was a woman in a bright yellow raincoat. She looked like she worked at the second shelter. "Sir, are you looking for a place to stay?" she asked. Ethan nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "For my daughter." The woman smiled softly. "Follow me." She led them to a small church on the edge of town that ran an emergency family shelter inside. It was warm and smelled faintly of coffee. Volunteers handed Lily a small cup of hot cocoa. She smiled for the first time in hours. That smile made Ethan's chest tighten. For the first time in weeks, he felt something like relief that night, as Lily slept beside him. On a borrowed cot, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about all the people who had helped them. Melissa, the mechanic who didn't charge him for towing, the woman in the yellow raincoat, strangers who owed him nothing, yet gave him everything. He realized that maybe kindness wasn't weakness. Maybe accepting help didn't make him less of a father. It made him human. The next morning, one of the volunteers, an older man named Frank, approached him. "You're a hard worker, right?" he asked. Ethan nodded. Frank smiled. "Good. I manage the church's maintenance. We could use a hand. It's not much pay, but it's honest work." Ethan accepted immediately. Within a week, he was fixing leaks, painting walls, and repairing broken benches. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Word spread quickly. A local business owner, impressed by Ethan's dedication, offered him a full-time position at his hardware store. He started saving money again. He and Lily moved into a small apartment above the store. Modest but warm. Melissa visited them one weekend, tears in her eyes. When she saw how far they'd come. Months passed. Ethan stood taller, smiled more, and laughed again. He even volunteered at the same shelter that once took him in, helping other families find their footing. Every time he saw a struggling parent walk through those doors, he'd remember that night in the rain and whisper to himself, "Not on my watch." One evening, as he and Lily walked home from the store, she looked up at him and said, "Daddy, can we help someone sleep inside tonight?" He stopped, his heart swelling with pride, and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we can, because that's what Sarah would have wanted. That's what life had taught him. That sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change someone's entire world." If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share it. Subscribe for more real, emotional stories that remind us all what love, hope, and kindness can do. Special request, comment below. What's one act of kindness that changed your life or someone else's? And remember, sometimes the hardest nights lead to the brightest mornings. Ethan learned that, and maybe so can we.